Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Matrix Green Pill podcast. I'm your host, Hilmarie Hutchison, and today's guest is a true pioneer in the world of creativity and innovation. Fredrik Härén, known globally as the Creativity Explorer, has delivered more than 2,000 presentations across 75 countries and inspired over 1 million people to reimagine how they approach creativity, not just as a skill, but as a way of life. He's the author of 10 books, including The Idea Book and his latest, The World of Creativity, which distills insights gathered from creative minds across 37 countries. In this episode, we'll explore the power of asking better questions, the global threads of human creativity, and how choosing curiosity over certainty can transform everything. Fredrik, welcome and thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I really look forward to this conversation.
So to start with, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
As you said, I identify as the creativity explorer. I've been studying creativity for 25 plus years, and I do it by traveling around the world to meet really interesting creative people and try to learn something about their creative process so that we all can discover something new about our own creative process. I used to define myself as a creativity expert, but about 5 years ago, I redefined that from creativity expert to creativity explorer because an expert has all the answers, but an explorer doesn't have any answers, but he has all the questions. And to explore means to venture into unknown territory in order to learn more about something. So that's what I like to do.
I love that you call yourself an explorer rather than the expert because the expert has the answers. Excellent. I know that you left a secure corporate path early in your career to pursue something unconventional. Can you share that experience and what that turning point felt like?
Well, to be honest, I started a company right out of university because it was in the middle of the internet age. And then we built that company up in 5 years and we sold it to a corporate company. But I was only in the corporate job because I had to stay in that company. I was only in that corporate. It was a listed company that bought our company. So I was locked up to stay there for 9 months. But then I realized corporate careers is not something for me. So I left that job and said, okay, I sold my company. What do I want to do with the rest of my life? And first I thought, I was just going to start another company and, the entrepreneurial mindset. But then I realized that even though I had enjoyed building companies, I really, really, really liked creativity. So I said, why don't I just dedicate the rest of my life to study human creativity? And that's what I started since 2000. That's been my only job. Travel around the world, meet interesting people, learn about the creative process, and then share what I've learned in books and on stages.
Wow, what an interesting choice to make. To have the option or the choice to go back into corporate or to build another company, but to say, you know what, I love creativity, and that's what I'm going to pursue and study and learn more about. So interesting. And then you've gone on, as I mentioned in the introduction, to write a lot of books. What was the inspiration behind your new book, The World of Creativity, and what makes this one different from your previous work?
There are a few different things. I guess first, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands and thousands of creativity books. And I said, if I'm going to write another book on creativity, it should be different than all the other ones. So I started looking at what does most creativity books look like? And they often are even they're usually described as some kind of like exercise. Read this book and you're going to learn. We're going to teach you exercises that you can do. But I've interviewed thousands of really, really creative people, and most of them actually almost none of them do creativity exercises. So I realized creative people don't do creativity exercises. What do? They make sure to be inspired by creative people around the world. So I said, why don't I write a book that is based on this? And also there are hundreds and hundreds of creativity experts. And I said, how do I differentiate myself from all of the other ones? And I said, well, I need to be the one that is not stuck behind a desk. I need to be the one that has gone out and interviewed people all over the world around what we can learn about creativity. Because when you do that, you get a human approach to creativity. So in my book, there's examples. I went to a nomadic tribe in Mongolia. I said, what can we learn about creativity from nomadic people in Mongolia? I went to the slums of Mumbai. What can we learn about creativity from the girls who lived in the slums of Mumbai? I even went to North Korea. What can we learn about creativity from the North Koreans? I wanted to study creativity in the most unexpected of places. I have to add that also, of course, I interviewed artists and painters and musicians and CEOs and entrepreneurs. Of course, I did that too, but I wanted to broaden the scope of my palette, so to speak.
Really interesting. So from the slums of Bombay, Mongolian nomads, to really capture, as you said, the human experience or the human approach to creativity. So rather than just being exercises, to actually interview a whole variety of creative people to share their experience.
Yeah, I actually described it to myself. I said, I want to understand creativity through humanity, and I also want to understand humanity through creativity. And someone read the book and said, you're the Anthony Bourdain of creativity. And I really like that because Anthony Bourdain he traveled around the world not to discover food, but to learn about people and humanity through food. And I do the same, but I broaden it to not just be food, but be any kind of creativity.
Fantastic. I love that. Can you share one takeaway or nugget from the book with our audience?
There's so many, of course. Since we were talking about food, let me share a story from Mexico. So I met with a chef in Mexico City, and he's ranked one of the top 50 chefs in the world. So I met with him and I said, okay, so you're clearly an innovative chef. So tell me, how do you approach this, what you do? And he said, well, I go back because the Mexican food is actually quite simple if you think about it. And the cool thing with Mexican food is the poor and the rich eat almost the same food. Like Mexican food is affordable, simple, and yet extremely yummy, right? So he said, I take the traditional Mexican food and I turn it into my own dish. And I said, but wait a minute, you can't be the top 50 chef in the world if all you do is just take traditional Mexican food. And he said, no, of course not. So for example, he said, let's say there's a cactus that most people in Mexico turns into a soup. He said, I'll take the same cactus, but I turn it into an ice cream. And he talked about it. He said, I aim for the surprisingly familiar or the familiarly surprising. So that's the sweet spot. He said, if you just do it, because food is familiarity, like you eat your grandma's cinnamon buns and you're automatically connected back to your childhood. It evokes extremely strong memories and food is tradition. But if you make it too traditional, then there's no innovation, there's no surprise, and then it's just the food that you know. But if you do it too much surprising, then people cannot connect to their tradition. So the surprisingly familiar is the sweet spot we should aim for. And if your ideas are not taking off, you should ask yourself, wait a minute, is this too familiar or is it too surprising? And then you can tweak it until you get to that sweet spot where people, in this case, it's like, I know this taste, it brings me back to my childhood. Oh, but it's not the soup, it's an ice cream. That's refreshing and new. That's the sweet spot.
So some familiarity with a twist that's a little surprising, but not too much of on either side. And to get that, as you say, the food of our, when we were growing up, of our childhood, that's comfort food. So you still get that feeling with something new and something fresh. Really interesting.
Remember when Steve Jobs introduced the Nano, the iPod Nano, the smallest one? And he went up and he said, have you ever thought about what this small pocket on the jeans is for? And then he said, it's always been there because it's supposed to be for the iPod Nano, which of course is not true. It was made for coins. But suddenly he had this very new innovation and connected it back to something familiar. Said, oh, that seems like it's always been there for my Nano. And then that was the sweet spot.
Amazing. Yes, so true. Excellent example. You've spoken in over 75 countries and interviewed creatives from all walks of life. What's the most surprising thing or one of the most surprising things that you've learned about creativity from this journey?
Because I mentioned the slums of Mumbai, so let me use this as an example. So I went once and I met this organization called Kranti, and they work with children of sex workers in the slums of Mumbai, which if you think about it, it's probably the people the lowest on the ladder of human respect. Like they don't get a lot of respect, but they take these girls and then take them out of the slums. And they built a school and they give these girls an education. And some of these girls have gone on to go to the best private schools in India, even became an actor and played on Broadway. So this Kranti organization, they show that a lot of our fate and our future is just based on the human lottery, that these girls are as smart as anyone else. What can I learn about creativity from, because no one has ever interviewed these girls about creativity. And I think I said I should. When I wrote this book, I actually put it into AI and asked, give me some feedback on the book. And the AI said, you're not acknowledging your privilege in the books. And it was right. I hadn't done that. So I needed to add a sentence in the book that, of course, me coming there as a middle-aged white man of exploring creativity, of course, I have privilege. But I write in the book that ignorance is worse than privilege. So the fact that I have privilege doesn't mean I shouldn't go there and learn from these girls. So I went there to learn from them. I said, tell me something I can learn about creativity from you. And it took them a while, but after a while, they came up with this word. And the word they came up with was sufferender. Now, of course, this is a made-up word, and they are not native English speakers. It's a bit clunky, the word, but I think it's beautiful. What does sufferender mean? It means that if you're in a bad situation, you shouldn't let that situation decide how you act. So they gave me this example that sometimes when the mothers are working, they can't be at home. So they need to go out into the street, but the street is dangerous at night. So they can't go to sleep because then something bad might happen. They make a fire and then they stay up all night because they can't sleep. Now, when they do that, they gather around the fire, the girls, and then they sing songs all night, which turns it into a beautiful situation. Then they gave me this example. They said, you have everything. You have a roof over your head. You live in peace. You have money. You can buy food. You have all of these things, and still you complain. And one of them said, like, you have this person, wannabe actor, who's want to be an actor on Broadway, but at the moment is working as a waiter. And you define yourself as, why can't I make it? Why don't you instead say, you don't say struggling actor. You say, I am an inspiring Broadway actor who at the moment is making a living as a waiter, and I'm going to use my acting skills to get as much tip as possible so that I can make more money so I can pay for acting school so I can make it on Broadway. That's the mindset of sufferender. It's beautiful because it's reframing the situation, but it came from these 15-year-old girls.
So they used their creativity to come up with this amazing word, sufferender. Maybe one day we'll see it in the Oxford Dictionary, who knows? But I love that, to take a bad situation, reframe it, and see the future, see something positive in the future. Excellent. From the slums of Mumbai, let's talk about business. Many people see creativity as a nice to have in business. Why do you believe it's actually essential?
I would actually say that most people in business do see it as essential, but they are not investing enough time and energy into this essential thing called creativity. I mean, I've been studying this for 25 years, but I would like to say it's never been more important than now. I actually saw the World Economic Forum is happening right now, and they just published an article where they said innovation is, I think, the third or fourth most important soft skill of the future. So why is this? Because if the world is not changing, you don't have to innovate. It's great to innovate, but you don't have to. But if the world is changing quickly, you have to do things differently. To do things differently, you have to change what you do. To change what you do, you have to be creative. So creativity is the skill that makes us adapt to change. And I think we can all agree that the world is changing dramatically at the moment. So it's not a nice to have, it's an absolute essential. But more importantly, creativity and innovation is what improves our lives. If we didn't have creativity and innovation, we would still be living in caves, being cold and hungry and dying at 25. It's what makes our world better. And on top of that, while we innovate all of these solutions that improve our lives, we actually also become happier. Creativity in itself makes us happy. Think about it. You're never happier than when you have a really, really good idea, except when you're in love. Love beats everything. But apart from love, nothing beats the feeling of having a really, really good idea or seeing your best ideas come true.
Very interesting. And as you say, the world is changing super fast, especially now with AI around us. The world has always changed, as you said. Otherwise, we would still be living in caves. So innovation and creativity is what makes things better. It is what has made our lives better. I also love the point that you made that creativity makes us happy to have that creative idea.
And if I can add something, I'd like to add, because I did a speech a couple of days ago, and one guy said to me, "Oh, you studied creativity all around the world. Do you think people in developing countries are more creative because they still have problems in their lives to solve, while we in the West have a very comfortable life?"
Necessity is the mother of invention.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that we have problems will trigger our creativity. And I looked at him and I said, what the hell are you talking about? 100 years from now, they're going to look at the most developed country in the world and they are going to say, oh my God, look at the primitive lifestyle. Look at all the problems that they still had. And he said, what do you mean? He couldn't understand what I was saying. It's like, but we don't have so many problems here. We have unlimited amounts of problems because even in Norway, the most developed country and richest country in the world right now, they are unhealthy, they're mentally sick people, there's environmental issues. There's so many problems in the world left to solve that could make us and our planet feel so much better. And this idea that we've almost come to the finish line is ridiculous.
Absolutely. We all have problems. They are just different kinds of problems. But the problems don't change because you're living in a developed world versus a developing country. There are still the problems. So that, therefore, people in developing countries are not necessarily more creative than people in developed countries, right?
The point that I also like to make is I think one of the most stupid things we did in the developed world was to call ourselves developed, because developed implies more or less done. Like if you say I'm a developed country, you say our country is done. There should be no developed countries on the planet, because that's a stupid mindset. But here's another interesting observation. As soon as we solve one problem, we also create another problem. I was recently in another slum in Manila, and I met with an organization helping the people in the slums of Manila in the Philippines. And I asked them, what is your biggest problem? What do you think they said? What do you think is the biggest problems in the slums of Manila, according to this help organization?
Lack of food, lack of money, lack of education, lack of work. I don't know.
Exactly. Mobile phones is the answer. Smartphones. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, smartphones have developed so quickly that the parents in the slums don't understand what a smartphone is. So into the slums comes men and gives teenage girls a smartphone and tells them to record videos and will pay them a small amount of money if they do. Of course, sexual videos. And the parents don't understand what the girls are doing, around the corner from their house. So here we have created this amazing technology called smartphone. And it turns out to be the biggest problem in the slums of Mumbai because of mobile sex trafficking, basically. I would never have thought that that would be one of the biggest problems in the slums. So as soon as we create a problem, and as soon as we solve one problem or create a new opportunity, new problems arise. So we always have problems to solve.
I was just listening to a video yesterday about new health drugs. They solve one problem, but in your body, they're creating another problem. So it doesn't matter where you go. We think we're solving for one thing, but we are creating problems somewhere else.
Exactly. But overall, the world is going in the right direction. We're solving way more problems than we are creating. But sometimes we need to stop and look at our innovation and say, are we going in the right way, or do we need to tweak? But I'd rather live today than 500 years ago. I think we can all agree on that.
Absolutely, 100%. And on the same topic, I know there are many people who are very excited about what AI can do for us, but then there's also people on the other side of the equation who are very worried about the side effects that's going to come and the unforeseen results of what AI could bring for us. One of your core ideas is that asking better questions is more powerful than generating better ideas. What do you mean by that?
The better you describe your problem, the easier the solution will be. When I say to people they should describe their problems, I said they should describe the problem as a question, because the subconscious mind likes to answer questions. So if we define our problem as a question, then the answer almost unfolds by itself. I'll give you a good story. So when I had children, my wife was going to have children, I was already 40 years old. I was already a creativity expert. So I said to my mom, because my mom is a teacher, or she was a teacher. So I said, I know creativity, but I don't know children. You've seen 100,000 kids in your life. Teach me something about children so that I can raise a creative child. And she said, whenever the child asks you a question, don't give the answer, because children automatically ask a lot of questions. But the parents love to give the answer to the child. We think we are teaching them, but we are actually stopping the creative process. So when a child asks you a question, you shouldn't give the answer. So what should you do instead? You should say, what do you think? Because now you're teaching the child that creativity is two things. First, ask questions, and second, find the answer to that question. But if we are always giving them the answer, we are teaching them that creativity is to ask questions and then find someone else who can find the answer, which is not creativity. So yes, asking questions is super important, but we also need to teach our kids to find the answer. For example, they can say, Daddy, why is the moon round? Instead of explaining it to the child, you just say, what do you think? Now you're teaching the child to come up with an answer, and many times their answer will be better than yours. It also works on the smaller questions, like, Dad, where's my bag? Where's my training bag? You say, what do you think? And the child will actually start thinking where the bag is and go get it himself. So it's a really good parenting trick to do this. I learned recently there is a kindergarten in Stockholm that put ChatGPT in the kindergarten on voice mode. And now the children are encouraged to go to the computer and ask questions. Now imagine our next generation growing up, because why do kids stop asking questions? Because adults stop answering questions. But the computer never gets tired. If you have a generation who grows up asking constantly questions and now not losing that, and at the same time are encouraged by their parents to not just ask questions, but to also go out and find their own answers, imagine what kind of creative generation we will generate next.
Very interesting concept, very interesting ideas there. I think our parents in the audience will love some of those tricks and tips that you've shared. Also wonder about, you need to have the balance then, because if you only gave them ChatGPT, which always just gave the answer, well, then there is no need to think for themselves, no need to come up with their own solutions. But if the parents then also encourages them to think for themselves, what do you think, and help them to learn to find answers for themselves, I think that balance would also need to be there.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. Because basically, we should look at AI as a very, very advanced calculator. Because if you give a calculator to a person and say, this is going to make you dumber by not being able to do math in your head anymore, now you can just do 5 times 5 on the calculator and you don't do it in your head anymore. Then the calculator has made us stupid. But if we give people a calculator and say, now you can do math on a level you were never able to do before, then the calculator is helping us do math. And AI is the same. If we use AI to just come up with answers instead of ourselves coming up with it, we are becoming dumber. But if we use AI to challenge ourselves to become much more creative, I think AI is the best innovation tool we have ever invented since someone invented a pen 5,000 years ago.
Let's change direction a little bit back to companies and organizations. How can leaders and organizations start embedding creativity into their culture in practical ways?
Well, the bad news is that is your company doing enough to develop your creativity? And 98% say no. So that might sound depressing. The good news is if almost no company is doing enough to develop creativity, the good news is as long as you do anything as a company, you are doing better than most, right? So the bar is set very low. But I also like to ask a follow-up question. How many of you think you as a person are doing enough to develop your creativity? And almost no one says yes. I stress this because I said developing a person's creativity is not the responsibility of a company. It's the responsibility of the person himself or herself. And of course, companies have an interest in doing this, but it's not their job. It's kind of like how people say school kills creativity. I said it's not the fault of the school that kids grow up and lose their creativity. It's the parents not teaching their children to keep their creativity alive, even though school tries to kill it. So don't blame school, blame their parents if you're not creative when you go out of it. Having said that, what can companies do? The first thing they can do is to identify what is our own creative process, because different companies have different creative processes. For example, I'm from Sweden. In Sweden, we have IKEA, or IKEA, as you like to say, and Ericsson. IKEA and Ericsson are two totally different companies. In IKEA, it's all about making it as cheap as possible, be creative in questioning every little cost, and make furniture affordable to the big masses. In Ericsson, it's about building huge infrastructural projects for society that are expensive, but that works in Saudi Arabia and works in Sweden and makes people make phone calls and video calls all over the world. It's all about engineering and big projects and make sure it never fails. These are two totally different cultures of DNA. If you work at Ericsson and you start working suddenly at IKEA, you're probably going to have a culture shock. And you might not even fit in. But if you identify what your own creative DNA in your company is and say, what makes us innovate in this group? And then you develop that. That's the first step, which means you cannot give one advice for what people should do except this advice. You need to understand how you innovate and then develop that.
Yes, I also like how you said that each person is actually responsible for their own development of their creativity, but the bar is so low in companies that anything a company can do to encourage creativity, and as you say, to find how best they as a company can build their creativity, then you'll be outperforming 98% of companies just by even being more creative. What are some misconceptions that people have about creativity that hold them back?
Let me share an example from the book, because one of the misconceptions is that the creative process needs to be full of anxiety. A lot of people look at creative people throughout history and say, look how they were struggling. For example, Ed Van Gogh, and like, look at these guys, they were struggling like crazy and look how creative they were. I think we're looking at it from the wrong perspective. I think Van Gogh became less mentally ill because he was painting. And I think that's true for Edvard Munch too. So I met this woman in Thailand, and she was a origami artist, but she had no creative anxiety at all. So when she got stuck, she did get stuck. She just didn't have creative anxiety. Well, I said to her, what do you do when you get stuck? And she said, I just take an idea nap. It's kind of like a power nap, except you do it for your creativity. So you take a break, you take an idea nap, you get stuck, you go out, you do something else. In her case, she likes to go to Starbucks and drink coffee. And then after a while, she would go back and continue her creative process. The lesson here is, while she was on an idea nap, she didn't have any anxiety. After I interviewed her, I also don't have that anymore. This idea that we need to feel bad about being stuck is just something we have been culturally taught. It's not true. You can have a break in your creative process without feeling any anxiety. And it makes the creative process so much more joyful.
Again, it's a mindset shift, right? So if you expect that it's normal to have writer's block or creativity block, and then you say, then all the anxiety comes up with it. I love the term that she came up with, to take an idea nap. Take a break, do something different, and then without the anxiety, and then come back to it. Really excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that example. Now we have come to the segment of our show where I will ask you some rapid fire questions, our version of a game show. Are you ready?
Let's go.
A country that surprised you with its creative spirit.
I'm going to say North Korea because I had zero expectations and I did learn something.
Excellent. The book you've gifted or recommended the most.
Influence, Science and Practice.
A creative myth you wish would disappear.
Some people are creative and some people are not. Everyone is creative and it's not a competition.
I love that because I always say I don't have a creative bone in my body, and I know you will totally disagree with me. One habit that keeps your mind sharp.
I would say traveling.
What does success look like to you today?
I get that question a lot, actually. So I have come up with a definition. My definition of success goes like this. When everyone else thinks that you have made it, but you know you are just getting started. Because success is not an end game. Regardless of where you are, success means aiming even higher and going for the next, whatever next means to you. You're never done. I interviewed a musician in Indonesia, and he said, I am a student of music. And I love that. You're never done.
I love that. That's an excellent mindset, an excellent way to think about things. I remember the Stoic Marcus Aurelius. As an old man, they would see him walking with his books and they'd say, where are you going? And he said, I'm going to my teacher to be taught. And never thought that he knew everything. I love that. And what is one thing that you do every day, no matter how busy you get?
I play one game of chess. One of my best friends sits in Portugal. We do one FaceTime call every day and we play one game of chess and we chit chat while we do that. It's good to have a good friend that you check in with every day.
I love it. And it also keeps your mind sharp because you're also having to think strategically. I love it.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for playing along. That was easy enough. Now I would like to ask you our signature green pill question. What was your green pill moment, the action or event that was the turning point for you or your career?
Well, there are a few, but I'm going to mention in 2005, I was voted Speaker of the Year in Sweden. I was very successful. I had a great life. I had a good relationship. But I looked at myself and I said, is this it? And I said, this is not it. I need to start over. I broke up with my then girlfriend. I quit my job and I moved to China to try to make it as a speaker in China without knowing the Chinese culture, without knowing Chinese. I went from being the best in my field in one country to an absolute beginner in a new one. And it was the best thing I've ever done.
Wow, that is certainly taking the bull by the horns. My goodness, being the best in one country and then challenging yourself to that degree to be the starting point in another country where you don't even speak the language, that for sure would have been a green pill moment. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your stories and your insights with such thoughtfulness and humility. I love your view, your mindset of always being willing to learn, to realize that we've not arrived, no matter who we are or where we are. Your work is a powerful reminder that creativity isn't something reserved for a few, but it's something that we all have access to if we're willing to stay curious and ask better questions. And I will stop saying that I don't have a creative bone in my body. That's a good learning for me today.
Yeah, that's a great summary. A wonderful conversation. Thank you.
To our listeners, if you're feeling inspired to explore your own creative edge, be sure to check out Fredrik's latest book, The World of Creativity, and connect with him on social media or at thecreativityexplorer.com. Are there any other ways the audience can get in touch with you, Fredrik?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so just Google the Creativity Explorer on LinkedIn. Hopefully I come up.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Matrix Green Pill podcast. If this conversation sparked something in you, don't forget to follow the show and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us share these important voices with more people. Until next time, stay curious, stay bold, and never stop exploring your creativity.
If you enjoy our conversations, please like and subscribe. See you next Wednesday.